Hey gang, this essay cites a lot of non-It's MyGO sources, so check the description below for spoiler warnings if that's something you're worried about. Episode 7 of Bang Dream It's MyGO, featuring the emotionally powerful portrayal of the band's first performance, is possibly the best directed episode of television I've ever seen. Series director Kakamoto Kodai, episode director and storyboarder Umezu Tomomi, and series and episode writer Ayano Yuniko deliver a masterclass in building tension that would make Hitchcock proud, and it's largely accomplished simply by some weird camera angles and by letting the band play the full-length versions of their songs. That is, of course, a gross oversimplification, so today we're going to go deep on how it all works, breaking down the episode virtually shot by shot, citing examples from cinema, and exploring how good direction isn't just about dynamic or interesting storyboards, but how it can, as it does here, elevate narrative and character development to almost limitless heights. I've discussed the scene that opens this episode before, but it's worth touching on again, because even before the opening credits roll, this episode delivers a clear statement of purpose. This is going to be a rough 24 minutes, both for the characters and for us watching at home. We open with the proto-MyGO going through their sound check for the show they're about to play, and it is a disaster. They're not even playing a song in front of an audience yet, and they're still a complete mess. Taki is impossibly nervous and tense due to the presence of Afterglow, her favorite band. Rana jumps the gun on her sound check and then wanders off when she's asked to wait. And Anon, never one to turn down an excuse to flee a tense or difficult situation, goes chasing after her before Anon can even do her own sound check. Soyo isn't even trying, which we've intuited by this point is because she doesn't care about this iteration of the band and is just biding her time until she can get their old band Krychik back together. To hell with new members Anon and Rana. And Tamori is so nervous and lacking in self-confidence, she can barely make her voice heard, even on the microphone. The final nail on the coffin is when the original anime's protagonist and face of the franchise shows herself for the first time and bears witness to the band's inability to even get through a simple sound check. It's not even the actual concert yet, and already these girls are putting on a more painfully awkward performance than Kasumi's seemingly endless a cappella rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. At least she was doing that on purpose. After that harrowing introduction and clear signal of how this episode is going to go, the show puts us, and the characters, in two successive boxes for the rest of the episode, letting the tension build and build as if they were in a pressure cooker. We see the characters come and go from the first box, but we never follow them. We're stuck in the box with whoever remains, allowed only to hear about what happens outside from the characters who leave and return. The second box, there's no escape from, for us or the characters. The first box is the dressing room the band occupies in the time between the disastrous sound check and the actual performance. It's not a long scene, just 4.5 minutes, but the show does everything it can to make those 4.5 minutes as tense and uncomfortable as possible. Very little in this sequence is shot with anything resembling a normal camera angle, but it's not just a case of using Dutch angles to create a vague sense of unease or of being off kilter. It's far more considered and specific than that. The scene starts us off with a shot positioned from the upper corner of the room, putting us in the point of view of what feels like a security camera. This feels like an odd choice from the beginning, even if the director was trying to cover the entire room, but it gets stranger. We don't cut in on anyone talking, and Tamori even wanders underneath the camera and sinks down out of sight. At this point, you could attribute this to just a quirky directorial choice, akin to the fisheye lens shots we sometimes get in laid-back camp, and Tamori briefly vanishing does set up a good visual gag in a second. But then the camera cuts into a closer, even more awkward downward angle on the door, before going back to the previous wide shot. This is weird. From there we go to a shot which, at first blush, doesn't seem as odd, but when you place it in context with the previous shots, we begin to get a sense of the visual language this scene is operating under. This shot is still unnaturally far away from Taki and Tamori, which does effectively emphasize the distance Taki is deliberately keeping between them, but the composition is strange. The angle of the camera is just slightly off. It's not enough to feel like a stylistic choice, but it's noticeable. Additionally, the chair in the foreground is an odd framing choice. It's a prominent element of the shot, but it doesn't tell us anything about the space we really need to know, nor is it visually interesting in any way. This all initially makes the shot feel weirdly amateurish, until you place it in context with the other shots. Our initial reaction was correct. The entire scene is shot as if from hidden cameras planted around the room. Look here, the water bottle and the dango are way too close to the camera in these shots, giving the impression that, rather than the scene being composed and shot by an objective third party here in the real world, instead there are actually cameras concealed on the table there which the characters are unaware of. The framing of this shot suggests a hidden camera positioned specifically for entirely unwholesome purposes, adding to the uncomfortable voyeuristic nature of the scene. And the camera keeps returning to the corners, with the shots running for longer than you'd expect, and not cutting in for close-ups on moments of important character dialogue or reactions the way a normally shot scene would. All of this combines to create the singular and specific sense that we're not watching a TV show, but that we're in the same universe as the characters, watching a feed of their activities without their knowledge or permission. Even the jokes contribute to the sense that we're not watching a show, but a live feed. When Tamori wanders out of frame, we don't really take note of it until Taki addresses her a moment later. At that point, our camera operator switches feeds to find Tamori, revealing she's been sitting on the floor. Likewise, when Afterglow enter the dressing room a little later, the camera cuts to them, given that they have become the most important element of the scene. However, we hear a bang from off-screen, suggesting something happening that the monitor missed due to being on the close-up door cam. It's only when we switch back to the wider camera that we see the bang was Taki knocking over a stool. Granted, it's not as though action occurring just off-screen isn't common in film and TV, both for comedy and suspense. Hell, this show does it in episode 4, when it's revealed 4 minutes into an intense conversation that Rana, who no one knows yet, has been lurking in the background watching the entire time. Made me spit out my drink the first time I watched this. But the specific way these shots are arranged and timed doesn't suggest intentional concealment on the part of a canny director, but actual events unfolding that an in-universe observer is doing their best to keep up with in real time. Of course, it is intentional concealment on the part of a canny director, but ironically, the unusual nature of how the scene is shot, rather than reminding us that this is a TV show, actually draws us into the world more. You would normally, of course, expect the opposite to be true. We're 7 episodes into the series by this point, after all, and the show up until now has had a consistent directorial style which, while well executed, employs a fairly standard visual language. Ordinarily, a sudden shift in style like this would loudly call attention to itself in a way that would rip the audience out of the narrative and leave them consciously focusing on the camera work instead. And indeed, if the direction suddenly shifted styles like this in a location we were already familiar with, such as the Ring Cafe or the Astronomy Club room, it would be extremely jarring. But because it's a new location, one we're not yet familiar with, the show can get away with it. Let's look at an example from earlier in the series to better illustrate this point. The incredible third episode, shot entirely as if from Tamori's physical point of view, is another dramatic shift from what we'd come to expect from this show, even after only 2 episodes in this case. Indeed, it's an even more obvious and extreme break from the norm than what we get in episode 7. And if any other episode had begun like episode 3 does, we would immediately label it as gimmicky and likely be distracted by it for the bulk of the episode. But because episode 3, in its entirety, is a flashback, existing outside the continuity of the narrative that's been established in the previous 2 episodes, we immediately accept the POV camera work as part of that sub-narrative, in a way we wouldn't for an episode set in the present of the show. The visual language of the flashback is immediately established as being different from the visual language of the show's present, and because there is that temporal demarcation, we immediately and unconsciously simply accept that to be the case. It's not jarring because this is the first extended flashback we've seen, and so there are no preconceived notions about how an extended flashback should look in this show. We simply think, okay, this is what the show's doing, and roll with it. And on a smaller scale, the exact same thing is happening with the scene in the dressing room in episode 7. Our brains reset to a certain extent whenever we enter a new space. It's why walking into a room and forgetting what you went in there for is so common. A similar principle is at work here. We've never seen the dressing room before, and so we unconsciously reset our expectations for how this new space should be shot, particularly since this scene doesn't immediately follow the scene with the soundcheck, but begins after the opening credits sequence instead, which is itself a reset. Obviously, there's a limit to how much our expectations are being reset, especially this far into the series, and we're not breaking from the main narrative like we do in episode 3, nor are we doing so from the very beginning of the episode, so a larger visual change, like suddenly shifting to POV, would be noticeable and distracting. But a smaller shift in the visuals, such as we get here, is acceptable to our brains, and so, like the shift to POV in episode 3, we just roll with it. Incidentally, going the other direction doesn't require any mental adjustment. When we see Anon and Soyo's flashbacks in episodes 5 and 9, respectively, or the brief dressing room scene in episode 12, it's not jarring that those are shot in a relatively normal style, because at that point all we're doing is reverting to the norm. At any rate, that explains why we accept the change in style without thinking about it too much, or really even noticing. But to get back to the original point, how does that immerse us in the world of the narrative more? For starters, the fact that the scene is shot as if from security cameras not only makes us feel as if we're watching something we shouldn't be, which enhances our discomfort, but by making us feel like we're watching a live feed and not a TV show, the direction is placing us in the same world as the characters, which in turn allows us to feel what the characters are feeling more acutely. More crucially though, it's all about space.
Space.
No, different kind.
Space!
No, that's not what I mean.
Space? Space!
Look, what I mean is...
Stop!
Oh my god. Good directors know how to make the room or exterior area, i.e. the physical space that a scene takes place in, a part of the storytelling as much as the dialogue and acting. That can include the design of the space itself, simply how the space is shot, or both. In this case, by taking a small space and emphasizing its size by using wide shots which continually make us aware of the room's borders, the direction is highlighting the character's feelings of being trapped, and in doing so, transferring that discomfort to the audience as well. Let's back up and look at the fundamentals for a sec, to better explain what I mean. This is basic filmmaking 101 stuff, but it's worth laying out. A director or cinematographer will call your attention to what they want you to focus on by how prominent it is in the frame, be that via size or position. As an extremely basic example, here in the 1917 comedy The Flirt, we're shown a banana peel and then a character walking towards it. This creates feelings of tension and anticipation about what will happen when the character reaches the banana peel. Like I said, that's an extremely basic example, so let's look at something a little closer to what we're discussing today. Referring to Hitchcock again, look at these shots from 1948's Rope. The premise behind this film is that the two protagonists have murdered a man, stuffed him in a cabinet, and then decided to hold a dinner party with his body still present, all to prove to themselves that they could. The film's gimmick is that it's all shot from a single camera, approximating a single unbroken shot as well as a physical film camera could in those days. As a result, when Hitchcock and his cinematographer want to remind the audience of the context of the dinner party and its stakes, they can do so in a relatively subtle and unobtrusive manner. This is an excellent example of not just highlighting an object the director wants us to pay attention to, but by using the space of the scene to do so. Let's drill down just a little further though, to a scene which, like our scene in It's MyGO, is not calling attention to any specific object, but is a pure use of the scene's space instead. In Tim Burton's 1989 film Batman, we join Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale on a dinner date at the opulent Wayne Manor. The scene begins in Wayne's absurdly cavernous formal dining room. The bulk of the scene avoids any close-ups and mostly just keeps one character in frame at a time. When they are in frame together, the camera emphasizes the huge amount of space between them. We're more focused on that than on the characters themselves. We then transition to a much smaller space, and the difference is striking. The behavior of the characters and the musical score signal the shift in tone, of course, but more than that, the cinematography emphasizes the warmth and coziness of the space. The colors are warmer, and rather than there being only one character in frame at a time, we've now stuffed 3 characters in there, a literal yet effective way of showing their closeness. This is a funny scene, but it's also extremely important for giving us a glimpse into Bruce Wayne's character. We're reminded of his absurd wealth, and we start off thinking he is, as another character put it earlier, a cold fish. When Vicky asks him if he actually enjoys dining like this, however, we see that he's more just clueless and acting in the manner he thinks is expected of him. His invitation to move the dinner to a more comfortable and intimate location then completes our reevaluation of the character, showing us that he's actually a pretty down-to-earth guy after all, or as down-to-earth as a man who inherited an insane amount of wealth and kicks the shit out of people while dressed as a bat as a rather unhealthy form of therapy can be. The point is, the cinematography is very effectively not just telling us a story about who Bruce Wayne is, but is putting us in the perspective of Vicky Vale as she realizes what kind of person Bruce Wayne is. The space the scene takes place in, and the way the camera frames it and the characters, not only tells us something about who these characters are, but actually puts us in their shoes and lets us feel what they're feeling, far more effectively than dialogue and acting could on their own. Mind, what Bruce and Vicky say and do here is important, just like what the band members say and do in the dressing room is important, nor would either scene work without said dialogue and actions. But by pairing their dialogue with shots that emphasize the space more than the subtle emotions we might see in a close-up, the direction is forcing our attention to the room and its boundaries. In the case of Batman, the fact that the space is so large, and in the case of It's MyGO, the fact that the characters, and ourselves as audience members, are confined to a space that's relatively small. The inverse of this is true as well, which is to say that when the director wants us to briefly forget about the space the scene is taking place in, they can make us do so. In Batman, the scene starts off with relatively normal normal framing of the actors, before cutting out to show us the huge dining room. There, the first couple shots, combined with our own assumptions about what a dinner date should look like, give the sense that the room is smaller than it is, since we don't actually see much of the space. It's when we cut out to the wide shot that the punchline is revealed. By contrast, in the dressing room scene in It's MyGO, we start with the wide shots, immediately establishing the size of the space the characters are occupying. It's when the characters briefly forget about the confines of the room that we cut in for more normal shots. Again, in Batman this technique is used in the reverse order and in service of a joke. Here, it delivers a powerful emotional moment. The shot layout during this brief exchange between Taki and Tamori is honestly spectacular. It not only uses the scene's odd camera angles to its advantage, but for 2 quick shots it breaks that convention to great effect. I mentioned earlier how the framing shows us very clearly how much space Taki is keeping between her and Tamori, but the odd angles the camera is able to indulge in here does something else as well. Now, this is a device that the show uses elsewhere, but it's particularly effective and illustrative of Taki and Tamori's relationship here. We start with the wide shot of Taki asking Tamori if she's nervous, and admitting her own trepidation. But then we cut to this shot, where Taki's face has been positioned out of frame. This is when Tamori is recalling a harsh comment she received regarding Krychik's show, and Taki angrily asks why Tamori would remember something like that. We understand that Taki's not angry at Tamori, but at the person who left that comment. But from Tamori's perspective, Taki's telling her she's done something wrong, that once again Tamori has misunderstood how she's supposed to act and feel as a normal member of society. This is why Taki's face is cut off here. Tamori doesn't understand Taki or what she's trying to get across, and the framing of the shot reflects that. Taki's face is likewise cut off in the next shot, but then when she just comes out and says something extremely straightforward and unambiguous, Taki's face is visible, because Tamori finally understands her. The shots in the water bottle there are still keeping them separated, but ironically, because these are 2 separate shots and we no longer see the yawning space on the couch between them, the physical distance between the 2 girls is actually forgotten for a moment, emphasizing their emotional closeness. And as I alluded to previously, it's key that these are actually 2 of the very few normal-looking shots in the scene, because at that moment, Taki and Tamori aren't focused on the room or the ticking clock in the corner, they're focused on each other. It's a brief lull in the storm, and another example of how genius the cinematography in this scene is, particularly since when Anon's return shatters the moment, we immediately return to the stranger, wider shots which highlight the room's boundaries and emphasize the girl's growing agitation. It's a fantastic example of how the cinematography mirrors and expresses what the characters are feeling, and how the contrast between these 2 quick shots and the rest of the scene manages to greater emphasize both the uncomfortable strangeness of the bulk of the scene and this brief moment of intimacy and understanding that's a momentary escape from the tension and claustrophobia. Indeed, beyond that very brief moment with Tamori and Taki, the only escape we get during this sequence is when the camera cuts away from the room for 2 fairly quick shots. First of the lobby, and then the house itself. These shots are at least partially here to indicate the passage of time, but they're not just for that. The show already does that effectively at another point without letting us out of the dressing room, simply by changing who's present and standing where in between shots, and removing the bass from the background noise. We even see a clock at one point, so the fact that even that basic device isn't used here in lieu of leaving the confines of the dressing room is significant, and tells us there's a deeper purpose here which is worth risking giving the audience a brief respite from the pressure cooker of the dressing room. However, the shots are designed to minimize as much as possible any relief we might feel. No individuals are focused on in these 2 shots. The first is simply establishing that the concert's begun, and the second is giving us our first look at the concert space filled with an audience. The purpose here, beyond indicating the passage of time, is to remind us of what the girls are about to be faced with. What, specifically, is making them nervous in the first place. Being trapped in that dressing room doesn't mean much if it's not preceding something stressful, otherwise they'd just be in a room. But when we see how hyped the crowd is, even for Chispa, a band I'd wager most people forgot existed until they popped up here as a little callback, we're reminded of the expectations being laid on our protagonists for this concert. Or at the very least, the expectations that they're laying on themselves, in a much more visceral way than Rand glaring at them during the soundcheck was. Getting to see the crowd here is also setting up a nice contrast between Chispa's audience and the proto-MyGos, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But because we don't see any individual faces in these two shots, our link to the protagonists and their current circumstances of being trapped in the box is not broken. The physical distance from any characters, such as Chispa on stage, also maintains MyGo's sense of isolation. Presumably they don't know anyone from Chispa, so seeing them from a distance like that also emphasizes the fact that even performing at a concert with their peers and classmates, our protagonists are very much alone. As a result of all that, when we return to the dressing room seconds later, we don't feel any relief from having escaped the box for a moment. Because the director kept those two shots impersonal, mentally we never left the box at all. Though Tomori might be the most nervous, Anon is the most vocal about it, and while her dialogue, body language, and Tateishi Rin's excellent performance all sell her anxiousness wonderfully, it's the way Anon is constantly moving around, coming and going, and bouncing around the confines of the space while she is there that not only enhances our impression of her anxiety, but amps up the tension for the other characters in the audience as well. This is particularly true in the shots where all 5 band members are present at once, including the last main shot of the scene, which occupies a full 50 seconds of the scene's 4.5-minute running time. I mentioned earlier how the beginning of an episode, the introduction of a new location, or even just the start of a new scene are all mental resets. Drilling down even further, a cut between 2 shots works similarly. Again, this is basic filmmaking language, but put simply, by cutting away from something upsetting, even briefly, we feel relief at no longer having to see the upsetting thing. This scene of Sally Field's emotional breakdown from 1989's Steel Magnolias keeps the camera focused on Sally Field for the bulk of the scene, since her breakdown is the point of the scene, but it also occasionally cuts away to her friends, to give us a brief respite from the deluge of Field's emotions and to keep the scene from becoming overwhelming. This scene from 1972's The Godfather is much shorter than the scene in Steel Magnolias, but it takes the opposite approach. When Robert Duvall tells Marlon Brando his son is dead, the scene stops cutting between the two men and focuses instead exclusively on Brando, letting us feel the full force of his grief and determination, which, even in this relatively brief moment, would have been diminished if we'd continued cutting back to Duvall during Brando's short monologue. The scene in the ring dressing room takes the second approach. The longer than normal shots, including that 50-second shot at the end, allow the characters to stew in their own juices in a way which would be undermined by more frequent cutting. And while I've explained at length how keeping the camera positioned further back keeps us aware of the room's confines, there's an additional reason for it here. When all 5 band members are in the same shot, we're not just dealing with the emotions of 1 or 2 characters, but we're catching all of the characters' emotions all at once. Take this quick exchange between Taki and Anon. There's a lot of crosstalk happening there, but we'll come back to that in a sec. For now, while this is far from the first time Taki and Anon have squabbled, in other scenes those encounters were arranged in the traditional shot-reverse shot fashion that's been a part of film's basic visual language since the silent era. Those scenes are more about the substance of what's being said though, and each character's specific reaction to the other. Here, the focus is less on the specifics of their argument and more on the growing tension of all the characters, the general miasma in the room as a whole, and so cutting around to every character as they speak would break the scene up in a way that would break the tension as well, resetting our brains each time. It doesn't particularly matter that Anon is trying to avoid thinking about their impending performance by fixating on costumes, or that Taki is trying to manage her own anxiety by taking her frustrations out on Anon and Rana. What matters is the mood itself. Anon's despair, Taki's temper, Tomori's silence. The single shot and the long take forces us to take all of these things in at once. Cutting from Taki to Anon to Tomori would direct our attention exclusively to that specific character's reactions and emotions, one at a time, while providing brief relief from experiencing the other character's emotions. With the single unbroken shot though, we have to endure all the emotions at the same time, just like the characters do. Even Soyo brushing everyone's hair and her crosstalk with Tomori and Rana contribute to the visual and auditory noise of the scene, itself adding to the general tension level. Let's look at that clip from before again. There's 2 separate conversations happening at once, which is normal in real life of course, but relatively more rare in a medium where the filmmakers will generally want us to focus on one conversation at a time. But again, the point of the dialogue here isn't the subject of the conversations themselves, which is why I omitted the subtitles to drive the point home, but just the energy having two overlapping conversations brings. Especially in such a small space, I haven't discussed sound design much at all in these videos so far, and a more in-depth discussion of that will have to wait for another day. But for now, just keep in mind that it's a valuable tool in the filmmaker's toolkit which sometimes gets overlooked. Marrying the crowded frame to a busy soundscape can really enhance the tension of the scene, and when you combine that with the long take and the unusual cinematography, it all works together beautifully to put us in the characters' shoes and let us feel what they're feeling. The overall effect might not be as cool or flashy as the long take Steadicam shots we sometimes get in film, but for what the show is trying to do here, I'd argue it's actually more effective. Though they're the two calmest members of the group, the scene and its extended shots give us a good sense for what Soyo and Rana might be feeling as well. Granted, Rana can be hard to pin down at the best of times, but her behavior here, leaving the stage during the sound check, wandering the halls in search of matcha coronets, isn't much of a deviation from the norm. Honestly, the most interesting peek into her head we get in this sequence is this exchange. I've mentioned before how I think Rana is a genuinely kind person, and her willingness to leave the TV off for the sake of Soyo's nerves is a small example of that. But as it comes in the middle of this long shot with the other characters' anxieties bouncing off one another, it's not as corny or gooey as it might have been if we'd had a close-up of, say, Soyo smiling fondly at Rana's response, which again would have broken the tension of the scene as a whole. That said, while it is just a small moment, almost lost in the chaos of the scene, it shows us the band's strengthening bonds even as the group as a whole is 10 seconds away from vibrating through the walls. And again, it also reminds us of Rana's kindness, which will come into play later in the episode when she smoothly steps in to save Tamori and the rest of the band from some awkward embarrassment. As for Soyo, well, you want someone who's hard to pin down. The only moment of distress we get from her in this scene that feels sincere, which uncoincidentally is the only time we get anything approximating a close-up on her face, is when she says she's going to pay her respects to the other bands, and is disappointed when Taki and Tamori refuse her invitation to join her. Taken out of context, you might assume she was hoping to distract them from their anxiety, or just hoping for some moral support for herself. But knowing what we know about Soyo now, as well as the fact that she chose when Anon was heading to the bathroom to make her move, we can assume that perhaps she was hoping to establish the three of them, the three members of the band who were in the original Krychek, as a unit to the rest of the bands, and perhaps subtly strengthen the bond between the three of them, away from the other two, at the same time. It's like in the intro. Taken out of context, we could assume that Soyo not having tuned her bass was a slip due to anxiety, but combined with the fact that Taki had previously taken her to task for the quality of her performance in rehearsal, and of course given what we learn about Soyo in the episodes following this one, we can reasonably assume that she forgot to tune her bass less because she was nervous and more because she just didn't give a damn. It's also why her comment to Rana about how watching the stream of the concert would make her nervous doesn't really ring true, and why she only scolds Anon for her anxious ramblings when she notices the reaction it provokes from Tamori. Her face and quick reaction tell us she's worried Tamori won't even be able to go on stage, and while she might not care about the quality of their performance here, she very much needs there to be a performance, and Tamori very much needs to be a part of it. The most interesting moment with Soyo, however, comes as the group finally breaks their way out of the dressing room and we, the audience, are let out of the box for the very first time. Here, Soyo addresses Tamori alone in the hallway. Like with Taki, Soyo's face is cut off here, telling us that Tamori doesn't actually understand what Soyo's saying, or more specifically, what she's not saying or who she means when she says let's. But the fact that Tamori is looking Soyo straight in the eyes, unlike in her scene with Taki, suggests to us that Tamori believes what Soyo is saying, and is taking her words at face value. It's a great little reprise of the moment with Tamori and Taki, and a fantastic cap on our time spent stewing in that first box. We have one more shot done in the security camera style here in the ring backstage area to help transition from the first box to the second. Then we're back to normal camera angles and a whole new kind of stress kicks off. Let's review just who it is that's stepping out onto stage for the first time. This isn't Poppin' Party's emotional school festival, welcoming the final member of their band to the fold, nor is it their triumphant performance at Space. Yes, that Space, having conquered their own inadequacies and anxieties to earn their place on that hallowed ground. This is a band which doesn't even have a name, which was thrown together in the most haphazard way possible by 5 people with 5 completely different and at times contradictory goals, who didn't pass a series of harrowing auditions, but instead were essentially shoved on stage as a last-minute replacement because Afterglow and Poppin' Party needed some warm bodies, any warm bodies, to fill 10 minutes between sets. Our lead guitarist has only shown up to practice when she feels like it and is wildly unpredictable. Our rhythm guitarist can barely play, our bassist doesn't give a shit, our drummer has a near-crippling inferiority complex, and our vocalist thinks her former band broke up because she couldn't sing well. They've barely been able to rehearse, they're under the intimidating watchful eyes of their band senpai, and as we're about to see, the other 2 former members of Krychik, one of whom means more to Tamori and Soyo than possibly anyone else in the world, are in the audience. There's not a contest or a festival or even pride on the line here, but at the same time, the stakes could not be higher. The direction shifts back to a normal style here. Continuing the security camera style wouldn't really work for this section. You need close-ups on both the band members and the audience members for the sequence to work, both for maximum emotional impact and just basic functionality. Plus, a musical performance just wouldn't be very interesting shot like that. The change isn't jarring though, because as I mentioned earlier, we're transitioning to a new space, and so when our brains reset and we revert to the norm, we're fine with it. There's actually a moment of relief that we've escaped the box of the dressing room, both physically and mentally, but we quickly realize that our protagonists have simply traded one box for another, even more harrowing box. The sparsity of the audience here is a double-edged sword. We saw earlier that Chispa drew a considerable and enthusiastic crowd. MyGO having to face such a crowd for their first appearance would be utterly terrifying. Tamori, after all, flinches even at the sight of this small crowd. But at the same time, seeing the contrast between Chispa's crowd, despite being a band which, again, I'd wager most people don't think about much, and the proto-MyGOs is depressing. It makes sense, of course. They are, again, a literally nameless band who are just filling time before Poppin' Party, one of the show's headliners, goes on, and so of course the crowd is going to take this opportunity to grab some drinks and visit the restroom. It's still kind of a bummer, though. However, the crowd isn't so thin just to make us feel bad for the girls, or even because it makes sense for the circumstances. We'll get to that in a sec, though. I mentioned at the beginning of this essay that the device used to make the second box so tense is simply playing the full-length versions of the songs. That's only part of it, of course, but let me back up for a sec and explain that. Generally speaking, with musical anime, or just anime which happen to feature a musical performance or two, the version of the song the characters play in the show is not going to be the full 3, 4, 5-minute version of the song you'll find on the CD single. It'll be a shorter version, usually cut down to around 90 seconds, the same length as a show's opening and closing songs. This is for a couple reasons. One is simply pacing. If the actual performance of the song isn't doing anything particularly crucial with the narrative, just stopping the show for 3 to 5 minutes isn't a very efficient use of time, particularly when you only have 21 minutes of show, 24 if you cut the opening and closing songs, to work with. Plus it just kinda grinds things to a halt. On the audio commentary for 1998's Can't Hardly Wait, a film not constrained by a strict limit on running time, the directors mention how they'd originally intended to have Charlie Korsmo's character sing the entire 6.5-minute version of Paradise City, but quickly realized it brought the entire film to a halt and that the joke wore off pretty quickly. And again, that's a movie and not a TV show with much less wiggle room when it comes to running time. It's generally just not smart on a pacing level. The second reason we don't see full-length songs in anime very often is that characters making small, fast, and precise movements, as one does while playing a musical instrument, are difficult and time-consuming to animate. Even the legends over at Kyoto Animation typically can't sustain that level of detail for even a 90-second song, much less a full-length one. In the musical performances in K-On! And Haruhi Suzumiya, for instance, there's a lot of cutting away to wistful shots of empty club rooms and the like. Now, it's a little quicker and easier with computer animation, which is why even the musical performances in the first season of Bang Dream, which was otherwise traditionally animated, are CGI, and no doubt why the franchise transitioned to full CG after season 1. But quicker and easier still doesn't mean quick and easy, which is partly why even in Bang Dream, full-length musical performances are rare. Outside of the movies or special episodes, both of which have a little more wiggle room in terms of production schedules and running time, I believe there have only been 2 full-length songs in the series up until this point. Sing Girls in Season 2, and Straight Through to Our Dreams in Season 3. And even then, Sing Girls is only animated for the first half of the song. The second half is a slideshow of Roka's childhood memories, which is a lovely sequence, don't get me wrong, but it's not a full animated performance. The big finale at the end of Season 3 animates comparatively more of Straight Through to Our Dreams, but we still get cutaways. That's also the swan song for Poppin' Party's story in the anime though, so it's an extremely special case and was clearly worth the extra effort for the staff. Also, if we're being really nitpicky, neither of those songs were technically the full version. They're close, but there are short bits clipped from each song, which, unless I'm missing something, makes It's MyGO the first full Bang Dream TV series to feature full-length songs. And they do it not just for one song, but over the course of the series, for 6. What's incredible though is that it's never self-indulgent, nor does it destroy the pacing. Granted, the 2 songs in episode 12 are more of a victory lap than anything else, but it's a well-earned and emotionally powerful one. The full performance of Ave Mujica in episode 13 is a statement of purpose for both that band and the upcoming sequel, and the devastating emotional power of episode 10's Uta Kotoba would have been severely neutered if the song had just lasted for 90 seconds. Tomori's opening spoken word section by itself is longer than that. Here though, there's even more going on. There are important narrative reasons for the songs to play for their full length. The performances here are doing much more for plot and character development than plain old dialogue ever could. And as with the suffocating scene in the dressing room, they create a situation, a box, which neither the characters nor us, the audience, can escape from. And the tension this engenders makes the dressing room scene look like non-Biori. If you've ever been on stage in front of an audience and you maybe didn't really want to be there in the first place, there were probably a few things running through your mind. The terror of screwing up and embarrassing yourself in front of a large group of people was likely pretty high on the list, as was perhaps the desire to immediately flee. You can't do that though, because that too would be humiliating, and you'd be letting down the other people on stage with you. So all you can do is carry on, and pray that your time on stage is over as quickly as possible. Most of all though, when we're on stage, whether we have stage fright or not, the thing we want the most is simply for the performance, whatever sort of performance it might be, to go as smoothly as possible. And when we're watching people perform on stage, either in real life or in a show like this, we generally want the same thing. Secondhand embarrassment can, in some ways, be just as painful as embarrassment we feel over our own actions, which is why the scene is immediately tense and only becomes more so as the concert begins and goes on. Again, this isn't just OMG will Saya make it to the show on time, or even OMG will Otai make it to the show on time. Womp womp. This is an extremely unpredictable group and an extremely volatile situation. Soyo may be used to appearing on stage with her school concert band, but she also just doesn't care how this show goes. Rana is in her element and thriving, but is also incredibly unpredictable and could wind up doing God knows what. And then there's Taki, who doesn't really seem to suffer from stage fright per se, but not only is Afterglow lurking around backstage, she's feeling an incredible amount of pressure to not only do this right for Tomori's sake, but to live up to the frankly unrealistic expectations she's built up for herself in her mind. Anon, meanwhile, is regretting every decision she's ever made in her entire life, and as we were deliberately reminded at the top of the episode, is extremely prone to fleeing. And then we have Tomori, the star of the show, who's not great in front of people in general, and who, as we were also reminded earlier, specifically has trauma regarding singing in front of an audience. And as for that audience, as mentioned previously, it isn't particularly engaged or predisposed to support our group of walking disasters. They're just the didn't need to pee group. That makes for the proverbial tough crowd to begin with, but you often hear bands talk about how they feed off the energy of the audience, and vice versa. There's nothing to feed off of here. No excitement, no anticipation, nothing. They're starting completely from zero, and if you'll permit me to extend the metaphor, doing so in a rusty old car with a bum transmission. Just getting the engine to turn over is going to be a challenge, never mind getting it onto the freeway. So our girls are already starting out from an extremely disadvantageous position, and as audience members, we're starting to brace for what's coming next. The whole dressing room scene was just set up for this after all. It wasn't building all that tension for its own sake. It was doing so that when the characters step out onto stage, we're feeling the disinterested or even scornful eyes of the audience as much as the characters are. And then, oh god, it goes just about as bad, if not worse, than anyone could have imagined. Rule number 1 of standing on stage in any capacity is that if you screw up, you keep going. If you're lucky, you have someone else there to cover up your mistake, but regardless, you don't stop and start over. You press on. The worst thing you can do is stop and ask for a redo. It kills the momentum of your performance, your own confidence, the goodwill of the audience, and it's just painfully awkward and embarrassing. Not just for yourself, but for anyone watching. The last thing anyone watching a show wants is to witness that kind of secondhand embarrassment. So naturally, the band does it here not once, not twice, but thrice. I can't even put on Hecton Bonso in my car without cringing at the opening guitar. That's how much the secondhand embarrassment of the scene has stuck with me. The opening scene with Poppypa and Afterglow watching them mess up a sound check feels like warm, fond memories compared to this. It's painfully, deliberately, and frankly magnificently excruciating. Like that last long take in the dressing room, their 3 false starts are all shot in one take, which, like that shot in the dressing room, gives us no relief or escape from the awkwardness. The awkwardness is enhanced further by placing the camera in the audience, as if we're watching the show live ourselves. We're fully in the box now, and we're not going anywhere. This begins the emotional roller coaster that this scene takes us on, and why committing to the full-length versions of the songs is so crucial. Small moments and events keep changing the course of the concert and our reactions to it. We're in despair, we feel hopeful, we're terrified at what we think's about to happen, and so on. And we need the full length of those songs to play out in order to keep us trapped in the box for as long as possible, so that when we hit those emotional ups and downs, the tension stretches out for much longer than a 90-second edit would permit. First though, they need to actually start playing. After those nightmarish false starts, we are mercifully granted some relief and some signs that things might improve. We cut in on the characters for one thing, the camera ignoring the audience, and like we saw in the dressing room, focusing on just 1 or 2 characters at a time provides a small relief from the tension of the scene as a whole. Soyo and Rana's conversation in the background is buying time for Anon to get her shit together, and it's quietly heartening that Anon has gone straight to Taki for support, the one person she can trust not to treat her with kid gloves and help her get her head on straight. Taki, meanwhile, isn't nearly as harsh as she could be. Her words have some bite to them, but her tone is, for her anyway, quietly encouraging. Tomori bringing Anon water completes the moment, and when Anon prepares to try again, she's greeted by some of that audience encouragement which was missing earlier. Her friends from class have come to support her. We're okay. It's time to try again. We can do this. And then here comes Togawa fucking Sakiko. Following the encouragement she'd gotten from Taki and Soyo, and her own determination to support Anon, there's a pretty good chance that Tomori was about to put on an at-worst solid performance. Then Sakiko strolls in. Sakiko, the person who meant more to Tomori than anyone. Sakiko, the person who nurtured and encouraged Tomori, not only as a lyricist and singer, but as a person, a human as well. Sakiko, the person who quit Krychik after the band's first performance, which Tomori was convinced she'd bombed. Sakiko, whose parting words to Tomori were, "You need to practice more than anyone," cementing the idea in Tomori's head that Tomori's performance was why Sakiko left the band. Left Tomori. Just when Taki had maybe convinced Tomori that her singing was good after all, just when Soyo had promised her that no matter what happened they'd still play together, here comes Togawa Sakiko, and whatever small amount of confidence and determination Tomori had managed to gather around herself collapses like a house of cards in a stiff breeze. Togawa Sakiko has come to watch her perform, and Tomori is done for. The emotional roller coaster takes a precipitous dip here, and as the rest of the band starts playing, we don't know what Tomori will do. She does start singing, out of reflex it seems, but any momentary relief we get from that is quickly snuffed out. She's singing, but just barely. The band plays on, but Taki is quietly despairing, and Soyo is coolly reassessing her options. Anon, for her part, doesn't seem to actually notice. This is an example of why letting the entire song play out is so effective. Tomori struggles to sing for a long time, relatively speaking, and it's deeply tense and uncomfortable. We want her to recover, we need her to recover, but she's a verse in and it's just not happening. Bang Dream tends to go light on the audience reaction shots, but here we clearly see that the audience isn't having it, which makes us feel even worse. We thought for a second there that this was going to turn around and go okay, but this is even worse than 3 false starts and the possibility of Anon fleeing in shame. If that had happened, at least it would be over. We're locked in now though, and the song just keeps going on. Tomori's lack of projection only lasts about 30 seconds, but in a situation like this, 30 seconds is an eternity. Sakiko, meanwhile, appears not just frustrated, but actually furious. I honestly couldn't tell you if Sakiko is just angry at Tomori for regressing and not putting on the kind of performance she knows Tomori is capable of, or if she's self-aware enough to understand that Tomori's regression is, in fact, Sakiko's fault. In a way, it's the same dynamic as Taki and Anon. Taki knows she's put a lot on Anon, and is probably at least partially responsible for her lack of confidence, but she's also aware that Anon is perfectly capable of playing the song, and Taki very straightforwardly tells her so. The dynamic between Tomori and Sakiko is much more loaded and intense, of course, and Sakiko can't just pull Tomori aside and say, look, you can do this, the way Taki does Anon. But because they were once so close, because they have that intense connection and have shared so much, Sakiko doesn't need to. All she needs is to meet Tomori's gaze and mentally scream the words at her, and Tomori comes to life. I mentioned earlier that the thin crowd wasn't just a case of an understandable lack of interest in the filler band, and here we see the first piece of that. Tomori needs to be able to clearly see and interact with Sakiko here, and the impact of the almost telepathic connection they share wouldn't be nearly so effective if Sakiko were being crowded and jostled by a bunch of excited audience members. We're now in another upswing in our manic-depressive emotional roller coaster, and while Tomori's voice is still raw and untrained, she's doing it. She's getting her feelings across, and we can sigh with relief, sit back, and enjoy the rest of the show. The band is playing together, the audience is into it, and Sakiko is smiling warmly. They were only playing one song after all, and they've gotten through it. The set had a shaky start, but it was ultimately a success. Time for some celebratory hugs backstage, maybe some fun banter between Taki and Anon, possibly even a heartwarming reconciliation between Tomori and Sakiko. What an episode. Good job, everyone. Oh wait, did you think we were watching the original Bang Dream? You know what's even more painfully awkward than 3 false starts and a singer who can't make her voice heard? Said singer directly addressing a single, solitary audience member with a raw and intimate speech that really should not be overheard by anyone else.
来てくれて嬉しい。あの時うまく歌えなくてみんなバラバラになって辛くて。
The band was literally taking off their instruments, and we were so close to escaping the box, but we're not out yet. Tomori's dragged us back in, and once again the tension is through the roof. What on earth is going to come out of her mouth? How is the audience going to react to this deeply personal appeal? How is Sakiko going to react? Then Rana saves the day.
バンドなんてもう嫌だって思ってた。でもまだ 名前もないバンドだけど。
It's honestly astonishing how little it takes to recontextualize a situation. Because Tomori hasn't actually addressed Sakiko by name, now that Ron is playing the guitar as a little backup to Tomori's speech, the mood immediately shifts. We may know that Tomori is still directly addressing Sakiko, but the audience at the show now thinks that Tomori is just speaking to the room as a whole. It's still raw and personal, but the guitar backup makes it feel intentional, like it was a planned part of the show all along. Our tension levels drop yet again, and our hearts soar as Tomori delivers one of the most emotionally powerful and cathartic lines of the series, or honestly of TV in general. And then Rana, having just saved the day, now turns around and ruins everybody's lives. I'll talk more about how this moment is a pivot point for the entire series in a future essay, but suffice it to say, certain events have been set into motion here which will have far-reaching consequences. For now though, it's just yet another jolt on our emotional roller coaster. The individual reactions of the various characters as Rana begins playing Spring Sunlight are as varied as our own. Anon is just, oh okay, we're doing this? While Taki is delighted. Soyo is uncomfortable, Tomori just goes with the flow, and Sakiko is destroyed. Remember how I mentioned earlier that the crowd needed to be thin at the start of the show so that Tomori and Sakiko could have their moment? Well, there's an important thematic reason for the crowd to grow during Spring Sunlight as well. During Hecton Banso, and Tomori directly addressing Sakiko immediately after, there's still a connection between them. Sakiko's refusal to engage up until now, as well as Tomori's reticence to reach out herself, has withered and frayed that connection, but it's still there. And here, as they truly face each other for the first time since Krychik fell, there's a chance they could rekindle that connection. Krychik is dead and gone, there's no bringing it back at this point, but Tomori and Sakiko could still have something together. Then Rana begins playing Spring Sunlight, and that possibility vanishes like a soap bubble popping. Like I mentioned, Tomori's just going with the flow here, and while she did comment previously to Taki that Spring Sunlight was different now, her difficulty reading people and situations doesn't, in this moment, allow her to really understand what she's doing or how it's affecting Soyo and Sakiko. Taki's thrilled not because she's malicious and she wants Tomori to burn bridges with Sakiko, but simply because this is the song, Tomori's live performance of this song specifically, that saved Taki and made her fall for Tomori in the first place, and she wants as many people as possible to hear it. As far as she's concerned, it's Tomori's song, but for Soyo and Sakiko, that's Krychik's song, and for Sakiko, it's the song she and Tomori wrote together. And now here she is singing it with another band. It calls into question everything Sakiko thought she and Tomori shared, and it must make Tomori's impassioned words to her just seconds earlier, repeating something Sakiko had, in fact, told Tomori herself, feel not only disingenuous, but like Tomori is actively mocking Sakiko. It is, as far as Sakiko is concerned, a deliberate slap in the face, and the tenuous connection they just begin to re-establish is broken, possibly forever. And now the crowd starts rolling in, itself a further mockery of what Sakiko and Tomori shared. Tomori has, in Sakiko's mind, abandoned Sakiko at this point, and is almost immediately reaping the benefits for doing so. She's moved on and left Sakiko behind, and the emotional distance between them is mirrored in their physical separation. The crowd is blocking Sakiko from Tomori's view. This is another example of what I discussed in a previous essay, the plot-character-plot loop, where the show's writing blends plot and character so well you don't know which came first, and in the end it ultimately doesn't even matter, because the whole thing is so beautifully elegant. The crowd is thin at the beginning because no one knows this band and everyone needs to take a piss before Poppin' Party goes on, and the room begins to fill up when word passes that the filler band is actually pretty good, narratively sound. But it's also a painfully beautiful thematic device as well, first allowing Tomori and Sakiko to connect, and then physically cutting Sakiko off from Tomori as she's emotionally cut off from her as well. And it continues to work on both levels. The crowd rolling in means Tomori doesn't notice Sakiko leaving in tears, which on a functional level means she's able to keep singing and not drop everything to rush after her, as she might well do. Thematically, it mirrors Tomori's lack of understanding about what just transpired, and how what she did unknowingly hurt Sakiko, and possibly destroyed their relationship for good. That returns us to the tension of the box, however, because now we don't know what Soyo is going to do. Soyo doesn't know what Soyo is going to do, as we can see by the way her head jerks back and forth, shocked everyone is just going along with this and desperately hoping someone will tell her what to do. The relief we felt when Rana began playing during Tomori's address to Sakiko was short-lived. Then, Tomori was the unpredictable and volatile element. Now it's Soyo. Ultimately, of course, Soyo doesn't do anything. She passively finishes the song and then exits stage right with the rest of the band. But during the song itself, we have no idea what's about to happen or if Soyo is about to explode. We go from her panic gestures to her slumping down with her face hidden, so we can no longer even tell what she's thinking. Sakiko running out of the house, through the lobby, and out into the street doesn't give us an escape from the box, because in a way that's Soyo's POV following Sakiko out the door, and we understand that all Soyo wants to do in that moment is chase after her. Once the panic wears off and she slumps down, the danger of that happening seems to diminish, but the chance of her making a scene on stage seems to grow. Even when the song finally ends without incident and the set is over, we're still not let out of the box. Soyo eventually does leave with the others, but she lingers for a really long time. The entire time she's standing there, we think that she's about to, at best, be shooed off stage by the next band, but more likely start yelling at her bandmates on stage in front of everyone. It's the final moments of being trapped in the box, and again, beyond just amping up the tension, it paints us a much clearer picture of who Soyo is than we'd seen previously. We've known something's not quite right with Soyo for a while now. No one who smiles like that is up to any good, and the first time I watched this scene I was hollering, "What is going on with her?" at my TV. But here it all comes together. Her obvious manipulation of Anon, her hesitation at Rana joining the band, and most of all, her reticence to play Spring Sunlight. It's a fantastic recontextualization of all her behavior up until now. And it works so well in part because, again, the length of the song allows her to stew up there on stage for a good long while our tension and questions about what she's feeling and what she's about to do build as well. It's probably not coincidence that it's Kasumi who lets us out of the box at last, practically bubbling over with praise about their set and blissfully unaware that anything dramatic did or possibly could have happened. We need some kind of button like that on the show to assure us that, as far as the audience is concerned, nothing too terrible happened and no one is thinking, "Hey, why couldn't that girl sing?" or "Who the heck was that chick who fled in tears?" That reassurance firmly closes the door on the box and lets us breathe again. You could have had random audience members going, "Wow, that was so good and nothing weird happened at all," but that wouldn't hit nearly as hard when it can come from the one and only Toyama Kasumi instead. More importantly though, we need yet another reset, beyond just the external reassurance that the show went well. This time it's cutting away from the stage to the backstage area, but seeing Kasumi and the rest of Poppin' Party makes that sudden shift, that reset, especially jarring, in a good way. It's an example of how deliberate and intentional the show is in deploying its legacy characters. Because Poppin' Party members have appeared so rarely, and because this is the first time we're seeing the band as a whole, the smash cut to them creates a sharp transition away from the stage and into a new space, sharper even than we'd get if we had just cut to the backstage area on its own, because suddenly seeing the Poppin' Party there with no warning, with Kasami's squeal cutting off the crowd noises, is so abrupt, and after the ups and downs we've just been subjected to, we need that transition to be especially sharp, to firmly and finally release us from the box for good, and to put a cap on the episode as a whole. Granted, it's not like everything is now sunshine and roses. Again, which Bang Dream did you think we were watching? But we're not trapped anymore, and we can deal with Soyo and Sakiko shit next episode. TV shows, live action and animated both, tend to have more workman-like direction than you can get from projects like films, which have a more generous budget and production schedule. Getting something as thoughtfully conceived and well executed as this in a TV anime, particularly in this day and age, feels like a miracle. And of course, it's only one part of the whole, which makes Bang Dream It's MyGO such a masterpiece. Not counting these, Mutsumi was in 55 shots in this video, and I didn't mention her once. Poor Mutsumi.